is the most addictive, violence-causing substance in the history of mankind.
Cannabis was prohibited after 5,000 years of continual human use for 3 simple reasons: racism, greed, and lies. Welcome back to another video from RevealCannabis.com. My name is Andrea Maharg, and I'm a certified cannabis coach and educator. In fact, this video is brought to you by the Cannabis Coaching Institute, where we train the next generation of cannabis educators to go out there in the world and teach other people about this beautiful and magical plant while making an income. If that interests you, head to CannabisCoachingInstitute.com. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the racist roots of cannabis prohibition. This video is actually from a speech I did at the recent CanExpo conference in Toronto. Shout out to CanExpo. If you want to watch the live video of me giving this talk from the conference, it's linked down below. All right, let's dive in. If you have ever held a stigmatized thought about cannabis and how it might be a drug, or that cannabis users are somehow lazy or dangerous or addicted, this video is for you. If you've ever been angry watching a family member or friend use prescription drug after prescription drug with no relief, while at the same time telling you that you're a druggie for using cannabis, this presentation is for you. And if you've ever wondered why there are still people jailed in Canada and the United States for cannabis offenses, and you can't travel worldwide with your prescription medication, this video is for you. When I first started studying cannabis about 5 years ago, I thought the key to breaking stigma was to teach people about the endocannabinoid system. I turned into a huge nerd, and I assumed that everybody else would as well. But it wasn't until I started studying deeply why and how this plant was prohibited in the first place that I realized that destigmatization requires another powerful truth. Cannabis was prohibited after 5,000 years of continual human use for 3 simple reasons: racism, greed, and lies. That means that today there are people right now suffering from things that cannabis might address, like sleeplessness, stress, pain, anxiety, inflammation, and so much more, but they are afraid to touch this plant because of a 90-year-old failed war on drugs. So how the heck did this happen? Well, today I'm going to shed light on one of the most infuriating and dangerous people in the history of cannabis prohibition worldwide. The guy we're going to be talking about is actually American, and he's been dead for a really long time. But arguably, he did more to harm this plant in the worldwide population than anybody else anywhere. He was wildly racist and hateful and extremely good at propaganda, and his legacy still prevents people from trying the most dynamic plant medicine available today in 2023, way up here in Canada. So let's meet Harry J Anslinger. You're going to see some of his quotes and some propaganda inspired by him and his message pop up in this video. I'd like you to pay special attention to all the posters that show what is going to happen to the helpless white women if people start using cannabis around them. Let's take a look at Harry J Anslinger's life. He started his job as the head at the Federal Bureau of Narcotics back in 1930, just as alcohol prohibition in the States was coming to an end. At first, he started chasing rum runners in the Bahamas. At the time, he's actually on record stating that he wasn't concerned about cannabis. It wasn't really on his radar. But when alcohol prohibition ended, he realized he would be out of a job unless he found something else to fight. There were relatively few cocaine and heroin users out on the streets, so he turned his sights to cannabis and almost single-handedly created a war on drugs. One of the ways he did this was by fabricating a link to 2 different things. First, he began equating cannabis users to violence, and this allowed cannabis to be more easily criminalized across the states. He said at one point, you smoke a joint and you're likely to kill your brother. Like, he just literally made this up, but this allowed laws to be created to put people in jail for using the plant. The second thing that he created a link to and also lied about was that the only people who were using cannabis at the time were Blacks and Mexicans, which was just not true also. This particular fact is actually nuts because just 30 years earlier, most Americans would have had some sort of cannabis medication, a tincture, in their medicine cabinet. It was an extremely popular and well-used medicine by all colors of people, just a few decades earlier. And this actually is one of the reasons that Anslinger started calling the plant marijuana instead of cannabis, which was what people were used to. This allowed people to really understand that it was the others, specifically the Mexicans, who were bringing this plant over the border. And so that we could really characterize marijuana with the other. It was part of his scare tactic, his propaganda. So it takes him a little while, but he eventually gets into full swing. He's spreading lies all over the place that cannabis leads to violence and salacious behavior, and only Mexicans and Blacks are using it. And if they keep using it, it's going to have a disastrous effect on the morally superior, please note my air quotes, white population. This was never actually a war on drugs. It's always been a war on race and culture. By 1937, Anslinger has really hit his stride. He's published an article in Reader's Digest, of all places, called Marijuana, Assassin of Youth. And he continued to sell his threat that cannabis was a massive threat to white people. This article was soon turned into a movie, and it was shown across the country, called Reefer Madness. And Anslinger wasn't content to just make up little lies. He would often dig and dig and dig in a situation to try to equate cannabis to something horrible that had happened so that he could sensationalize this. I'll give you an example. There is a case of a young man who brutally murdered his whole family. He had a history of psychosis and went on to do some terrible things. And Anslinger really wanted the public to know that this was caused by evil marijuana, even though it wasn't. So he asked several doctors, up to 30 doctors, hey, do you think this was caused by marijuana use? And they all said no, except for the one guy who said yes. So what does he do? He plasters this one story from this one doctor about how cannabis has made this guy go crazy and kill his whole family. And one thing about Anslinger was that he wasn't just a rich, white, powerful man hanging out on his own. He had other rich, white, powerful men who he could turn to help spread his message far and wide. One of those people he could lean on was William Randall Hearst. He was a huge newspaper magnate in the time. He ran most of the newspapers across the country, and he himself was constantly just printing lies that served him and his business interests. He also had a stake in the timber industry, and you can understand that if hemp was to come and take over the timber industry, he would have double the kind of problems. So Hearst and Anslinger teamed up to kind of spread these stories all over the United States with the use of Hearst's huge media empire. Anslinger stayed in his job for decades, and his legacy still lives on with us today in 2023. But in 2023, it's really hard for us to think back and imagine how this man who was so full of hate and rage and misinformation and lies, how he could have done such a great job with propaganda and getting so many millions of people to believe his lies. But you don't have to imagine. I'm going to show you a clip that's performed by an actor in the role of Harry Anslinger. As you listen, please remember that Anslinger was the head of a major government organization tasked with keeping people safe. You'll see what a skilled orator and propagandist he was. Please focus on the energy and vitriol with which he speaks, and try to imagine yourself as a member of the crowd in one of his speeches.
Greetings, my fellow hard-working Americans. As many of you already know from the papers, marijuana, otherwise known as reefer, pot, tea, grass, must be rejected at all costs. is an evil Mexican weed that produces in its users insanity, criminality, and death. This evil Mexican weed with roots in hell has truly been brought to us by the devil. Marijuana is the most addictive, violence-causing substance in the history of mankind. There are over 100,000 total marijuana smokers in the U.S., many of which are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. These entertainers promote drug use and are creating more marijuana addicts. My friends, when using this drug, Negroes and dirty Hispanics begin to think they are as good as white men. And they are now giving naive white women this drug. And it makes them wild. Makes these innocent women want to have sexual relations with them. It is turning good American men mad, and many into communists and heroin users. Even our children are using this drug. It is therefore vital that we outlaw marijuana, not just because of its damaging effects on the degenerate races, because of the damage it is causing to our American values. Remember to spread this truth. God bless you, and God bless these United States of America.
That's right. Your grandma won't use cannabis salve on her arthritic hands, in part because of that guy. He wasn't alone, but he was a major instrumental player in taking away a plant that we have been using for thousands of years and in kind of like one fell swoop, demonizing it for us even decades and decades into the future. This infuriates me, but it also makes me get out of bed and want to talk to you about this important topic on the daily so that more and more people can come out under the guise of propaganda and see this plant for what she really is. Now, if you're watching this and you're Canadian, you might be wondering like, hey, Andrea, up in Canada, surely things must have been different. I wish I could say that that was the case, but in fact, we conflated racism against Asians with cannabis use. And if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, you were fully indoctrinated also by the DARE program that was going on in the States. However, we're not America, and we've had a fully legal medical cannabis program since 2001, and we have been federally recreational legal or adult use legal since 2018. So you think like, oh, probably we're doing so much better now. Unfortunately, that is still not the case. If you are Black or brown or a Native Canadian, you are far more likely to be arrested for a cannabis-related crime than if you were white, despite the fact that studies show that cannabis is used by all different people at similar rates. It's estimated that right now there's up to 500,000 Canadians who have a criminal record related to simple cannabis possession. This means that people are suffering lifelong legal consequences from a plant that should never have been prohibited in the first place. We have just actually scratched the surface on the interplay between racism and the prohibition of cannabis. I'll link up a couple of books down below that you can read if you'd like to do some more research on this topic. I hope that this infuriates you like it infuriated me. And remember that if you want to turn this passion and this fire into a cannabis educator career, we can teach you how to do that over at the Cannabis Coaching Institute. Check out cannabiscoachinginstitute.com for more. Thanks for watching this video. Please make sure that you like and subscribe and leave me a comment below. What is the most infuriating part of cannabis prohibition for you? All right, I'll see you on the next video.